being able to make your own jump rings on demand is a really great skill set to have when you work with metal. You know, sometimes you need just a certain size jump ring or even a shape. There's nothing like getting them in bulk and knowing their precision cut, but I'm going to show you today how to make your own custom jump rings. So we're going to dive right into that, and we're going to talk about wire. I usually like to work with dead soft wire of different colors, different gauges. And when I say gauge, if you're new to that concept, it refers to the diameter of the wire. The higher the number, the thinner the wire. Most of my jump rings I like to make with 22, 20, and 18 gauge wire. And you can certainly go beyond either of those numbers to make thicker or thinner jump rings. But I find most of the jump rings I use for jewelry making fall into those three categories. So there's so many ways you can make your jump rings, but basically what you want is a mandrel. And a mandrel is any kind of tool that can be used as a rod to form your jump rings around. So Fire Mountain offers a huge variety of mandrels and coiling options for preparing your wire to turn into jump rings. One option would be this set of mandrels right here that come in different diameters, and I'll demonstrate how cool those are to work with in a second. You can also get a series of step mandrels. This is just one of them right here. So you can see the diameters are stepped from small to large, and those are wonderful to have on hand too. Another option is to use pliers, especially Weber's makes a wonderful line of specialty pliers that offer different sizes, and as you can see, these are both round and offer me the convenience of different diameters, but Weber's also offers them in specialty shapes like squares and ovals and triangles. So many options to choose from. What do we do to prepare our wire? Wire, when it comes, is usually put in a rounded shape in a bag, or it comes off of a spool, and it's generally not kinked or bent too much. But if you find that your wire needs a little straightening, sometimes you can just gently roll it with your fingers, and that's all you need. But if you need to straighten a little more wire, a couple of tools that you might want to have on hand would be nylon jaw pliers, and you apply a little pressure as you stroke the wire until you get it to the straightness that you desire. Another option is this great tool that was developed by my friend Wyatt White. This is a wire straightener that works with all the diameters, and you just wrap this around your wire, these three little rolls, and you put a little pressure and you pull. Now, one thing that happens when you straighten wire, you notice it got a little stiffer as I did that. I'm work hardening the wire, and that's a good thing to know to do when you do need a little bit of stiffer wire for other things you might create, like ear wires. But back to jump rings. So I'm just going to cut off a little bit here and show you how I would use that mandrel we just looked at earlier. So I'm taking kind of a large one here, and I'm going to bend an L into here, and you can see there's a little slot that runs up and down the tip. So you can just insert the bit of wire there, and very easy with your hands, just continue rolling down the rod until you have the amount of coil you want to create your jump rings, and slip it right off. It's just that easy. Another option would be to use a coiling device like the coiling gizmo here. I've already mounted some wire on here, and I just need to keep rolling, and it will make nice, clean, tight coils as long as I want along this mandrel, and it comes with different size mandrels. So now we have our coils. How are we going to turn them into jump rings? There's a couple of options. One is this really cool coiling plier. It's designed just for that purpose, and you use it in conjunction with a jeweler's saw. Since most of my jump rings are 18 to 22 gauge, the recommended saw blade for that wire is a 1. You might try different gauge or different size saw blades and find that they're easier to work with, but that's the one I'm going to work with. And there's a great video on sawing and how to use a jeweler's saw by Tammy Hahnemann, so be sure to check that out in the Resource Center. One thing we want to do is when our blade is mounted, you want to make sure it's nice and tight. You'll hear a ping when you pull it from behind. And the blades are always facing down towards the handle of the saw. Now, we would just slip our coil of wire into the pliers, and there's a little bar right there that holds that coil in place. You really don't want a coil that's longer than the jaws of these pliers. Sometimes as you're sawing, they tend to pull apart, and it can make it a little difficult. And a friend shared a tip with me that is really helpful if you do like using the coiling pliers, and that's just to take some painter's tape and cut it slightly longer or wider than the coil is long. And you would just wrap it around the coil so that it goes around maybe 2 or 3 times. You don't want to make it too thick, and you can tear some of that off if it's too much, or cut it off. And then you can just push down the tabs inside there and use a tool. I'm just going to use this coiling mandrel and just get those ends tucked right inside there. So what that's going to do is hold this all together when I saw. And when you use a jeweler saw, anytime we're cutting metal or wire, it's always a good idea to give a little help to it with the aid of a lubricant device. So one of the things you might use is some beeswax, or I'm going to use this Pro Cut, which is a lubricating oil for saw blades. And I'm just going to guide it on one side of my saw blade, the back, the front, and the other side. That should be good. And as you do a lot of sawing, you just want to apply this occasionally, and if you feel like it's getting rough. And then eventually you'll find that you have to replace your saw blade. And they can even break too if you're not holding it properly, but they're not terribly expensive, and always just go for a fresh saw blade if you think it's not cutting as well as you'd like it to. We're going to take this little coil and put it up so it's snug up against that bar that holds it in place. And work on a surface you're not going to be upset if you mar it, because this is going to dig into the surface, this bar. It's going to give you a little bit of stabilization, as you saw. And you see that there are 2 channels, one on either side. That's so that you can hold it if left-handed or right-handed, but we don't want to saw through both channels because you're not going to end up with a jump ring. You're going to end up with 2 half circles of wire. So we hold it at a 45-degree angle, and you want a firm grip, but you don't want to squeeze it so hard that you crush your jump rings. The same is true for sawing. A lot of people, when they first learn to saw, kind of put the death grip on it. You don't want to squeeze it really hard. You want to hold it with control, but have a relaxed grip. Let the saw blade do the action. Forcing it is not going to cut better or faster. In fact, it's probably going to catch your saw blade, and that's when saw blades often break, is when people try to use too much force. So let's go ahead and just saw through some of this coil and see what we get. Now I can continue sawing almost all the way down through those coils, but we're just going to stop there. And if it sticks like that, sometimes your saw blade will come out cleanly. Don't panic. All you have to do is undo the saw blade, usually from the bottom, and just slide it off. You can remount that blade when you're ready to use it again. So now let's see what we have. We've got this packet here that when I tear apart the tape, I have some beautifully cut jump rings. Now the nice thing about doing a saw is that you get a flush cut on each end. And when I talk about a flush cut, if that's a term that's new to you, what that means is when you cut something, you want a nice parallel cut to the length of your wire. For instance, these type of cutters are known as flush cutters. So when I cut a piece of wire, this end's going to have a straight edge. The side that's cut on the inside is going to have a V-shaped point. So we don't want to end up with jump rings that are straight on one edge and pointed on the other. They're not going to close well, they're not going to look attractive, and it's just not a professional thing to do. But that's important to know, because another way that you might want to make your jump rings is just to take a very good set of flush cutters. Also check to make sure what gauge they recommend using them for. If a flush cutter says it's up to 22 gauge or higher, you don't want to use them on 18 gauge wire. That's going to be too much stress on those flush cutters. So be sure to check out the variety of flush cutters available. But in this case, you get what you pay for. it's really worth investing in a high quality professional flush cutter if you're going to use them for things like making jump rings. So what we do when we have our coil is to look at where it stopped, and I flush cut it along this edge, meaning this edge is nice and straight. So I'm going to turn the flush cutter so it matches that. The flat edge is going to be parallel, and don't try to cut more than a few jump rings at a time. That's just too much on your flush cutters. You can just keep going down the length until you've gone through the whole coil, but we won't do that. We'll just get a few of these. And to make your jump rings really look nice and clean and professional, you're going to want to open and close them always from side to side. That's just the rule for jump rings. But if you open them, and these are, I worked with a bigger gauge, so hopefully you can see the edges here. This edge is a little pointed. I'm going to go in and just take off not even a millimeter's worth, much less than that, the very, very tippy end. I just want to take that little notch off. Not so much that it really changes the length of my jump ring. It will a little, but not so much that you notice, unless you cut too much. But when I go to close that, and I'm going to grab some flat nose and a pair of chain nose pliers, you're going to have two straight ends that should be parallel to one another, which gives you a nearly seamless look when your jump ring is closed. So one of the tips I want to share with you, some of you may already know, but if this is all new to you, I'm going to share one of my favorite jewelry making tips. Years ago, I discovered by accident that when I was doing my jump rings, I always was checking them from the front. Yes, that looked perfectly parallel to me, and I always thought I was closing my jump rings well. And then occasionally I would look down maybe at a necklace or a bracelet only to see that a piece had fallen off. And I didn't have any occasion to remember when I might have caught it on something, so it was a mystery. How did such a well-closed jump ring fail and I lost a piece of my jewelry? And then one day, just by mistake, I looked away for something and I turned my pliers and I realized the jump ring I thought that was closed perfectly parallel looked parallel from the front, but at the top it wasn't completely closed. It was only partially closed, which made it very easy to even just slightly catch on something without me noticing and open up, and then I lost my work. So get in the habit of when you close your jump rings, check not just from the front, but also from the top of each ring to make sure it's fully closed. And one last tip I'd like to leave you with about jump rings is doing an overclosure. When you close your jump rings around a piece of jewelry or a component, I actually overlap the ring so that it wouldn't technically close. What that does is it introduces tension in the wire, and wire has a bit of a memory. So it remembers where it's been bent before and it wants to bend the same way again. So now when I go back to close it, I'm just going to pull the slightest amount of force to realign it so those ends are parallel. But there'll be like a permanent tension in there. And usually when you do this, sometimes you hear it snap into place. You don't always hear a snap, you don't need to hear a snap, but you usually should feel it, that's still holding the tension. That way, you will have the tightest, most secure jump ring closure you can have, with the exception of a soldered closure or a split ring closure. So let's take a look at what that looks like. And it's parallel from the top, parallel from the front, and I hope that helps you out with working with jump rings, whether you buy them in bulk or make them on your own. These are great essential tools to have as a metalsmith, and thank you so much for joining me today in the Fire Mountain Gems and Beads Jewelry Making Studio. If you like this video, please let us know. We always appreciate your comments and liking it, and even more importantly, don't forget to share it with your friends. You can find us on all the social network sites, and just keep an eye out for all the new videos coming your way. Ding the bell and we'll let you know when the next video is ready to watch.